Military hospital straight ahead. No friendlies directly on military. I'm lighting it up.
Gotcha. It shakes so crazy.
Howdy there. I recently posted a few videos testing out the Logitech Extreme 3D Pro and Reforger. There were a handful of individuals asking about the setup, so I figured I might as well go ahead and post a guide. With that, there are a few things I'd like to know before hopping in. With one of those things being the creator GnarSasquatch. They have a wonderful guide on how to get this set up. Highly detailed. Strongly recommend you check that one out. I will have this video linked in the description below. Another thing of note, I'm new to all of this. I only just started using flight sticks a month ago, so there are likely individuals using HOTAS or otherwise in Reforger that are more versed in this topic than myself. So using flight sticks in Reforger is a bit of a pain. The reason being there's no actual support for the sticks themselves, so we did have to find a bit of a workaround. Luckily, people have found that. That's what we're going over today. The main point of that statement being the game will only recognize either controller or mouse and keyboard inputs. As it stands for stick support in the future, it's not really on the docket. There are people who've gone over that in more detail. I do believe a dev had posted something on an AMA. But again, I think GnarSasquatch goes over that in more detail. So check the vid out if you want some info there. What we're doing is installing a few programs to help translate our stick inputs into both controller and M&K. There are going to be 3 essential installs. I will have those linked below. You're going to want to start with VJoy. I believe you'll have to reboot after install. Once we have everything installed, you're going to want to start with Joystick Gremlin. This is only going to work if you've properly installed and rebooted VJoy. That is a requirement for Joystick Gremlin to work, so just make sure you've done so. On the tab section, there's going to be a few different options. This won't be available until you've actually installed 360, but we don't even need to worry about this tab. Depending on your setup, there might be a few separate options for like throttle, rudder, and whatnot. We're just using a single stick. This one is capable of HOTAS. You do have a slider for collective up and down. You may need to calibrate the stick. That will be in your tools. It's going to have you run through a few inputs. Not all of them are going to be available depending on how you have things mapped. So if you're not able to give it the input it's asking for, there should be a skip option. Once you've completed the calibration, you can head on over to your tab. There's going to be multiple tabs here. This is the only one you're worrying about at this moment. Pretty easy to set up. You can save the profiles, I believe. It's not something I've done today, just to give you a quick rundown of how to set the actual profile up. When the profile is not engaged, it will actually show you what the software is registering. Focus in on X, Y, and Z. X, of course, being your side to side, your Y being your up and down. The Z rotation actually represents the tilt of the tail rudder. If you're playing on mouse and keyboard, that would have been Q and E. This one's pretty straightforward. You're just going to head on over to your X axis. Looking over here, you'll see remap add, hit add, that's it. Repeat that process for your Y axis, and then we're gonna head on over to Z. And again, you don't need to do anything on that front. You could potentially set up the other buttons here to represent inputs on the controller emulator, but I don't recommend that. I think it overcomplicates things. So for Joystick Gremlin and the controller emulator, we're gonna stick to mapping out the axis, our rotation, and even potentially our collective up and down. That one's a bit new for me, as I typically roll with HOTAS. You know, I don't know what people prefer. That's what feels comfortable for me at the moment, so that's what I've been working with. Once we have completed the profile for Gremlin, you can go ahead and save that if you'd like. We then need to engage the profile. One thing I'd like to note is that you're only going to see the inputs registered within Gremlin when the profile is unengaged. As soon as you engage that, you'll no longer be able to see those inputs. They will actually be represented within the controller emulator. So I am back making a quick addition to the video. There is one thing I forgot to go over with X360CE. That being the issue that will arise. It should pop up upon the first few times of booting it. You'll be able to find this issue up in the tabs where you would typically select your controller options. It is on the far right. Click on issues. It should be a virtual driver if I remember correctly. Make sure you get that installed. It will greatly improve stability. Clear this and map out the right and left thumbstick together. Starting with the X-axis of the right thumbstick, go ahead and hit the drop down. Simply slide on over to axis 1. These axes are numerically labeled within Gremlin to help identify which is which. For our Y-axis, you should, in theory, be able to select axis 2 and invert. I have had issues with the invert option on that front, so I've been manually mapping this. You can do so by clicking the top arrow on the right thumbstick. That option will appear when hovering over the right thumbstick. You'll then see it turn red. This indicates it is recording. Hit that forward motion. Try to keep it as straight as possible, so that way we're not running into any unintended inputs. To pull up, or rather to pull the nose of the heli up, we would simply hit the down arrow. We're going to do a similar motion, pulling as straight as we can down. Once you've gotten these inputs mapped out, you no longer have to worry about inverting it. Moving to the left thumbstick, this one is quite easy. Hit the drop down, select your axis, axis 3. Again, that's labeled in Gremlin. You can see that movement represented when turning the stick left and right. We've got all of the access applied here. You can see all of those movements coming through. We then need to adjust the settings of the thumbsticks. This can be done using the tabs just above the controller. Hit that right thumb. Once you got this tab pulled up, first thing to note is the numbers displayed just above the graphs for your X and Y axis. The green one being your direct input and the blue one being the output of the controller emulator. We need that blue number to be sitting at 0 to avoid any unintended inputs. So we're going to adjust that dead zone, ideally keeping it as minimal as possible until that blue number sits at a persistent 0. After moving the stick around, I personally like to kind of flick it back to the center. You're likely going to be getting a little bit rough when flying in and out of action. Now, that brings us to our anti-dead zone. This works directly to combat the dead zone that we just applied, and it does so by applying a certain amount of input once breaching that dead zone. So say I finally hit that 2% marker of input, the controller emulator is now registering that input. Instead of just applying a 2 to 3%, it'll actually apply an immediate 5%. This will help the stick feel more responsive. Moving down to the last setting for the right thumbstick, you're going to want to make sure to check both of these boxes. When you uncheck, you'll see a change. We don't want less, we want more. We're looking for more responsiveness in the actual movement of the heli. From there, take the slider, adjust that to around 40 to 50%. It really is going to be personal preference at this point. And the reality of the matter is I'm pulling most of these suggestions from the GnarSasquatch video that I prefaced at the start of this video. So by no means are any of these suggestions original, but I have found them to be pretty spot on. You're going to be able to tweak these as needed. You'll figure this out as your comfort grows with the stick. Moving to the left thumbstick, our objective is a bit different. We're actually looking for a little less responsiveness out of the movement of our Z rotation. You'll remember that this was mapped to the X-axis of the left thumbstick as represented in the movements here. We're going to slide that dead zone on over until it negates the play within the Z-axis of my stick. Now, the Logitech 3D Pro I found actually has a lot of play on that Z-axis. For me personally, right around 13 to 14% is where I feel the tension actually engage on the rotation of the stick, and I don't want the input to be felt until I feel the tension. So I'm gonna have to make that just a tad lower. And that is just about perfect for me. So anything within that line there you see in the center will not be registered as an input. For the anti-dead zone, you can go ahead and leave this at 0. We're going to lean into the squishy feeling for the left thumbstick. The reason being, those tail rudder adjustments typically represent a minute change in aim, or you're just trying to get that extra thrust when engaging in a harsh turn, which takes us to that last setting. We don't want to hit this box like we did with the right thumbstick. We are looking to keep that less sensitive. Go ahead and adjust the sensitivity. Anywhere from 40 to 50% in my experience is pretty solid. Again, I'm directly ripping these suggestions from GnarSasquatch. In reality, I'm not getting any of this set up without it, so go ahead and check out that channel. That pretty much sets us up in terms of left and right thumbsticks. You can see a more accurate representation of our inputs here. We'll see that that stick will always fly back to 0. Same with our Z axis. You can even head on over here, and it should apply the same controller 1 settings. So if you did set this up to engage a profile upon booting up a certain executable, it will apply controller 1 settings, including all of your thumbstick settings. So that ties things up pretty neatly for both Gremlin and X360CE. These are the only movements that I have set up through the controller emulator. Moving on to the last program for our setup, that is Joystick. This is the program I use to map out the rest of the buttons on my stick. You can do this through both Gremlin and the controller emulator. I found it to be a headache, so I shifted to this. When opening this program, you may need to adjust the number of joysticks to configure. I had to do this before it would ever even give me the tab for my Extreme 3D Pro, so make sure you're looking there. Also check for the stick type. I've got one stick, one POV, the POV being the directional stick at the top of your joystick. Now, once you've gotten that applied, move on over to the Extreme 3D Pro tab. I've already gotten everything mapped out here, as you can see. So when mapping these out, it's all pretty simple. Looking at the directional stick at the top of my flight stick here, I have that mapped to B for switching weapons. Some people will map their movements. You can really get creative as to what you'd like to apply here. This is just what felt comfortable for me. For the most part, I keep the primary buttons or uses of the heli mapped to the top of my stick. There is the bottom base buttons. I do believe that is 7 through 12. Much easier to use when you are running just hand on stick. Since I'm running HOCAS, I've limited myself a bit in that regard, but again, it's what feels comfy. Now, the main reason that I use this program in place of Gremlin and 360CE is the additional options for mapping. For me personally, I have a few additional buttons on my mouse, which I do use in game for my comms. So it was extremely convenient to be able to take button 4 and map that to the flight stick itself. You'll see that I've got aim down weapon sights, auto hover, our radio comms, we've got our lock for our stingers, our hellfires, we've got aiming, and then on the trigger, of course, fire. I do also apply the start engine here at the bottom, but since I'm running HOCAS, most of those inputs are rather easy for me to navigate one way or the other. All right, so once you've gotten everything set up, I typically will throw all of this onto my second monitor and keep an eye on it. You can minimize it, it's not going to make that big a deal. Minimizing X360CE will actually phase out a lot of the performance tax that program might cause. So it's something to keep in mind. This brings me to the last part of this setup, and one that I don't think a lot of people take into account is your system's ability to run all of these things at once. My computer does truck along. I have an i7 8700K. It is overclocked. I do have a 4070 in here with 12 gigabytes of VRAM, 32 gigabytes of DDR4 RAM, and I do feel the tax of having a few separate programs running all at once. When I am applying both keyboard and controller inputs, I have noticed a slight frame drop. It might be in your best interest to avoid using dual inputs, seeing if you can't get it all set up through the controller emulator. But I've not done that just yet. I'm going to go ahead and load up a quick scenario just to give you guys a look at what the flying actually looks like once we've completed that process. Best way to practice, in my eyes, open up a Game Master. You can also find a hosted server in the community tab for heli practice. I am sure there are plenty. Now, I already have these set up as I run a few operations with the boys here and there, so I will be using this one as an example today. Go ahead and get rid of that Huey. Let's find something a little more fun. How about a little bird? Go ahead and get ourselves set up. Get our nifty little pilot boy. There we go. Hit C upon clicking on the character. I have a weird little bug where it will not always let me shoot my rockets. So let's make sure everything is working. I told you before, I do use the HOCOS setup, so I'm using shift and control for my collective up and down. And let's go ahead and show you guys what this looks like. So I personally have to swap on over to my mouse real quick and take a look around and let something I want to do. So go ahead and throw on my auto hover here, quick landing. I found that running the stick makes landing, as well as maneuvering in general, a lot easier. Oftentimes I even try to engage in kind of a manual auto hover just to really test out your understanding of the controls. Alright, try 2. I believe that's a BTR. Oh, there's that Z-axis I was talking about earlier. Don't want that to be all too responsive.